Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that when an individual holding a valid arms license in Pakistan passes away, their legal heirs are faced with the task of managing the inherited firearm. Considering the strict regulatory environment governed by the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, which of the following approaches best ensures legal compliance and responsible handling of the firearm during this transition? Option A. Attempt to have the deceased's arms license transferred directly to the name of one of the legal heirs without any further legal documentation or application for a new license. Option B. Obtain a succession certificate from a Pakistani court to legally establish heirship, and then have the identified heirs apply for new arms licenses in their own names, presenting the succession certificate to the licensing authority. Option C. Sell the firearm to a private buyer immediately, without first securing a new license for the heir or ensuring the firearm is legally relicensed by the purchaser. Option D. Assume the firearm automatically transfers to the eldest surviving family member as per customary practice, without initiating any formal legal or licensing procedures. The correct answer is B. Obtain a succession certificate from a Pakistani court to legally establish heirship, and then have the identified heirs apply for new arms licenses in their own names, presenting the succession certificate to the licensing authority. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms and the stringent regulatory environment surrounding their ownership and transfer in Pakistan. Navigating the legal requirements for an arms license, particularly when dealing with a deceased individual's estate, demands meticulous attention to detail and strict adherence to the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and associated rules. Failure to comply can lead to legal repercussions, including penalties and confiscation of the firearm, and can also raise ethical concerns regarding responsible handling of inherited assets. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and application of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, specifically Section 10, which outlines the procedure for the transfer of arms licenses upon the death of the licensee. This approach necessitates obtaining a succession certificate or equivalent legal document from a competent court in Pakistan that clearly identifies the legal heirs. Subsequently, these heirs must apply for a new arms license in their own name, presenting the succession certificate and fulfilling all other eligibility criteria as stipulated by the licensing authority. This method ensures that the firearm remains under legal ownership and control, with the new license holder having undergone the necessary vetting process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to transfer the existing arms license directly to an heir without obtaining a succession certificate or applying for a new license. This bypasses the legal framework, designed to ensure that only eligible individuals possess firearms, and fails to acknowledge the transfer of ownership through proper legal channels, disregards the licensing authority's oversight and the requirement for new vetting. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the firearm automatically transfers to the next of kin without any formal legal process. This overlooks the legal requirement for a formal transfer of ownership and licensing, potentially leaving the firearm in an undocumented and illegal possession. It fails to recognize that an arms license is a personal permit tied to the individual. A third incorrect approach is to sell the firearm to a third party without first obtaining a new license in the name of the heir or ensuring the firearm is legally relicensed by the purchaser. This constitutes an illegal transfer of a firearm and can have severe legal consequences for all parties involved, as it circumvents the established procedures for arms sales and transfers. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with such situations must adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the relevant legal framework, Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. Second, determine the specific provisions related to inheritance and transfer of licenses. Third, consult with legal counsel or the licensing authority to confirm the exact procedural requirements. Fourth, guide the client through the legally mandated steps, emphasizing the importance of documentation and proper application processes. This ensures compliance, protects the client from legal liabilities, and upholds the integrity of the arms control system. Question 2. The assessment process reveals an applicant for an arms license in Punjab, Pakistan, has provided all standard documentation, but a junior officer expresses a personal concern about the applicant's perceived temperament, without any specific evidence of past misconduct or legal disqualification. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the license immediately to avoid potential accusations of bias, without further investigation into the applicant's eligibility. Option B. Postpone the decision indefinitely until a more comprehensive, non-statutory psychological evaluation of the applicant can be conducted. Option C. Proceed with a thorough verification of all statutory eligibility criteria as per the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and relevant Punjab provincial regulations, disregarding the subjective personal concern unless it is substantiated by objective legal grounds for disqualification. Option D. Deny the license based on the junior officer's subjective concern about the applicant's temperament as a precautionary measure to ensure public safety. Correct answer is C. Proceed with a thorough verification of all statutory eligibility criteria as per the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and relevant Punjab provincial regulations, disregarding the subjective personal concern unless it is substantiated by objective legal grounds for disqualification. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent sensitivity of firearms and the stringent legal framework governing their possession in Pakistan. Navigating the requirements for an arms license demands meticulous adherence to the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and associated rules, which are designed to ensure public safety and prevent misuse of firearms. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply for a license with the state's responsibility to grant it only to eligible individuals who meet all legal prerequisites. Careful judgment is required to avoid both arbitrary denial and the issuance of licenses to unqualified persons. The best approach involves a thorough and objective evaluation of the applicant's eligibility based strictly on the criteria outlined in the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and relevant provincial regulations. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, confirming they are not disqualified by any criminal record or mental health concerns, and ensuring they have a legitimate reason for seeking a firearm, as stipulated by law. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal mandate to regulate the possession of arms and uphold public security. It prioritizes compliance with the established legal framework, ensuring that decisions are fair, transparent, and defensible under Pakistani law. An incorrect approach would be to grant the license based on personal acquaintance or informal recommendations, without verifying the applicant's compliance with all statutory requirements. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the legal safeguards designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands, potentially leading to breaches of public order, and violating the spirit and letter of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license solely based on a vague concern about potential misuse without concrete evidence or a legal basis for disqualification. This is professionally unacceptable because it can be perceived as arbitrary and discriminatory, failing to uphold the applicant's right to due process and potentially contravening the ordinance's provisions for legitimate firearm ownership. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire decision-making process to junior staff without adequate oversight or clear guidelines, leading to inconsistent application of the law. This is professionally unacceptable as it undermines accountability and can result in procedural errors or the overlooking of critical eligibility factors, thereby compromising the integrity of the licensing system. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and any provincial amendments. This involves meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation, conducting necessary background checks, and applying the eligibility criteria consistently and impartially. Any decision, whether approval or denial, must be well documented and justifiable based on the legal framework. In cases of doubt or complexity, seeking guidance from senior officers or legal counsel within the relevant authority is a crucial step in ensuring professional and legal compliance. Question 3. The evaluation methodology shows that when considering amendments to the Arms Act, 1959, in Pakistan, which of the following approaches would best ensure that proposed changes are effective, equitable, and enforceable? Option A. Implementing an immediate ban on the sale and possession of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, citing concerns about their potential misuse. Option B. Relying primarily on media reports and public petitions to identify areas for reform within the Arms Act, 1959. Option C. Conducting extensive consultations with law enforcement, licensed firearm owners, and civil society, alongside a detailed risk-benefit analysis of proposed changes to assess their impact on public safety, crime rates, and legitimate firearm ownership. Option D. Significantly increasing the fees for all types of arms licenses to discourage ownership and generate revenue for enforcement agencies. The correct answer is C. Conducting extensive consultations with law enforcement, licensed firearm owners, and civil society, alongside a detailed risk-benefit analysis of proposed changes to assess their impact on public safety, crime rates, and legitimate firearm ownership. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing the impact of proposed changes to the Arms Act, 1959, in Pakistan requires a nuanced approach that considers both the intended outcomes and potential unintended consequences. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing public safety concerns with the rights of citizens to possess firearms for legitimate purposes, all within a complex legal and social framework. A thorough impact assessment must go beyond superficial analysis to identify potential loopholes, misuse, and the practical enforceability of new regulations. The best approach involves a comprehensive, multi-stakeholder consultation process coupled with a detailed risk-benefit analysis. This entails engaging with law enforcement agencies, arms dealers, licensed firearm owners, and civil society organizations to gather diverse perspectives. Furthermore, it requires forecasting potential impacts on illegal arms trafficking, crime rates, and the legitimate arms market. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of good governance and evidence-based policymaking, ensuring that any amendments to the Arms Act, 1959, are well-informed, practical, and serve the public interest without unduly infringing on lawful rights. Such a process is implicitly supported by the need for reasoned legislative action and public consultation, often associated with significant legal reforms in Pakistan. An approach that focuses solely on increasing licensing fees without considering the broader implications is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the root causes of illegal arms possession and could disproportionately affect law-abiding citizens who rely on firearms for self-defense or sport, potentially driving them towards illegal channels if legitimate acquisition becomes prohibitively expensive. This approach lacks a proper risk-benefit analysis and ignores the potential for unintended negative consequences. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to implement a blanket ban on certain types of firearms without a thorough assessment of their prevalence in criminal activity versus their legitimate use. Such a measure, without supporting data and a clear understanding of its impact on licensed owners, could be overly broad and fail to achieve its intended objective of reducing crime while alienating responsible citizens. It bypasses the need for evidence-based policy and targeted interventions. Finally, an approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or public outcry without rigorous data collection and analysis is also professionally unsound. While public sentiment is important, policy decisions regarding arms control must be grounded in objective data regarding crime trends, firearm availability, and the effectiveness of existing regulations. This approach risks creating policies that are emotionally driven rather than strategically effective, potentially leading to ineffective or counterproductive outcomes. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This is followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and gathering their input. A thorough analysis of existing laws and regulations, including the Arms Act, 1959, is crucial. Subsequently, potential policy options are developed, and their impacts, both positive and negative, are rigorously assessed using data and expert opinion. This includes considering economic, social, and security implications. Finally, the most effective and justifiable policy option is selected, with mechanisms for monitoring and evaluation built in. Question 4. Compliance review shows that a firearm was legally registered to a deceased individual in Lahore, Pakistan, and their heirs wish to retain possession of the weapon. Considering the provisions of the Pakistan Arms Act, 1959, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the heirs to ensure lawful possession of the firearm? Option A. The heirs can continue to possess the firearm under the deceased's existing license until it expires. Option B. The heirs should attempt to sell the firearm privately to a trusted individual who may or may not have a license. Option C. The heirs should apply for new arms license in their name, declaring the inherited firearm as part of the application process. Option D. The heirs should discreetly dispose of the firearm to avoid any legal complications. The correct answer is C. The heirs should apply for a new arms license in their name, declaring the inherited firearm as part of the application process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with firearms and the stringent regulatory environment governing their possession in Pakistan. The Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules are designed to ensure public safety and prevent misuse of weapons. Navigating the requirements for an arms license, especially when dealing with a deceased individual's firearm, demands meticulous adherence to legal procedures and a thorough understanding of inheritance laws as they pertain to regulated items. Failure to follow the correct protocol can lead to legal repercussions, including penalties and confiscation of the firearm, and can also create significant administrative burdens. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating the formal legal process for the transfer of the firearm by applying for a new arms license in the applicant's name, clearly declaring the inherited firearm. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirement under the Pakistan Arms Act, 1959, which mandates that any person possessing a firearm must hold a valid license. By applying for a new license and declaring the inherited weapon, the applicant is proactively seeking legal authorization for possession, thereby complying with the law. This process typically involves verification by the licensing authority, ensuring the applicant meets the eligibility criteria and that the firearm itself is accounted for. It respects the regulatory framework by treating the inherited firearm as a new acquisition requiring proper authorization. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply retain possession of the firearm without any formal application or notification to the authorities, assuming the inherited license is transferable. This is a significant regulatory failure, as arms licenses are generally personal and non-transferable upon the death of the licensee. The Arms Act, 1959, does not provide for automatic transfer of an arms license to heirs. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to sell the firearm privately without obtaining the necessary permissions or ensuring the buyer has a valid license. This bypasses the regulatory oversight designed to track firearm ownership and can lead to the weapon falling into unauthorized hands, a severe breach of public safety regulations. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to discard or destroy the firearm without informing the authorities. While seemingly a way to avoid legal complications, this still fails to account for the firearm within the regulated system and may be viewed as an attempt to conceal its existence, potentially raising suspicion. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with such situations should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the relevant legislation, in this case, the Pakistan Arms Act, 1959 and its rules. Second, understand the specific implications of the event death of the license holder on the existing license. Third, determine the legally prescribed procedure for the transfer or relicensing of the firearm. This involves consulting with the licensing authority or seeking legal advice if necessary. Fourth, execute the required steps diligently, ensuring all documentation is accurate and submitted promptly. Finally, maintain records of all communications and actions taken for future reference and accountability. Question 5. Market research demonstrates a growing interest among individuals in Punjab, Pakistan, to acquire firearms for personal protection. A potential client approaches you, seeking guidance on how to obtain a firearm. They mention having heard about various methods of acquisition, including informal channels. What is the most professionally responsible course of action to advise this client, considering the Arms Act, 1900, and Punjab's provincial regulations? Option A. Suggest that the client explore informal acquisition channels, as these may be quicker and less bureaucratic, while advising them to be discreet. Option B. Inform the client that possession of a firearm is generally permissible for personal protection in Punjab, and they can proceed with acquiring one without immediate concern for formal licensing. Option C. Advise the client that obtaining a firearm requires a formal application process, strict eligibility verification, and adherence to all provisions of the Arms Act, 1900, and relevant Punjab provincial rules, emphasizing that any acquisition outside this framework is illegal. Option D. Recommend that the client focus on acquiring a firearm first and then address the licensing requirements later, as the immediate need for protection is paramount. Correct answer is C. Advise the client that obtaining a firearm requires a formal application process, strict eligibility verification, and adherence to all provisions of the Arms Act, 1900, and relevant Punjab provincial rules, emphasizing that any acquisition outside this framework is illegal. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the complexities of the Arms Act, 1900, and associated provincial rules in Punjab, Pakistan, concerning the acquisition and possession of firearms. The core difficulty lies in ensuring strict adherence to legal requirements while managing client expectations and potential misinterpretations of the law. A thorough understanding of the application process, eligibility criteria, and the prohibition of unauthorized possession is paramount. The correct approach involves meticulously verifying all documentation and ensuring the applicant meets the stringent eligibility criteria outlined in the Arms Act, 1900, and relevant Punjab provincial rules before proceeding with any advice or action. This includes confirming the applicant's lawful residency, absence of disqualifying criminal history, and a genuine need for a firearm as defined by law. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and public safety, which are the fundamental objectives of firearms legislation in Pakistan. It prevents the facilitation of illegal firearm acquisition and upholds the integrity of the licensing process. An incorrect approach would be to advise the applicant to proceed with acquiring a firearm without first confirming their eligibility and the legality of the intended acquisition method. This is professionally unacceptable as it risks facilitating a violation of the Arms Act, 1900, potentially leading to severe legal repercussions for both the applicant and the advisor. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that possession of a firearm is permissible without a valid license, which directly contravenes Section 3 of the Arms Act, 1900, making such possession illegal. Furthermore, advising the applicant to rely on informal or undocumented arrangements for firearm acquisition ignores the strict licensing and registration requirements, exposing the applicant to legal jeopardy and undermining the regulatory framework. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the Arms Act, 1900, and the specific provincial rules of Punjab. This framework necessitates a proactive approach to verifying client eligibility and the legality of any proposed firearm acquisition. It requires clear communication with the client about legal obligations and limitations, and a commitment to refusing any request that falls outside the bounds of the law. The guiding principle should always be to uphold the law and ensure responsible firearm ownership, rather than to expedite a transaction that may be illegal. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of arms license applications processed in Punjab, Pakistan, over the last fiscal year. Considering the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and public safety while addressing the increased workload? Option A. Implement a multi-stage verification process for every application, involving thorough cross-referencing with law enforcement databases and confirmation of all submitted documentation, even if it slightly increases processing time per application. Option B. Delegate the final approval of licenses to the most experienced junior officers, instructing them to follow the regulations, but without additional supervisory review for the increased volume. Option C. Streamline the verification process by using only readily available internal databases and accepting applicant declarations as sufficient proof for most criteria. Option D. Expedite the processing of all applications by prioritizing speed and volume, assuming that most applicants are legitimate and relying on spot checks for verification. Correct answer is A. Implement a multi-stage verification process for every application, involving thorough cross-referencing with law enforcement databases and confirmation of all submitted documentation, even if it slightly increases processing time per application. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of arms license applications processed in Punjab, Pakistan, over the last fiscal year. This surge presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with firearms and the critical need for stringent adherence to the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, ensuring that each application is meticulously reviewed for compliance with all legal requirements, including applicant eligibility, proper documentation, and security clearances, is paramount to public safety and national security. Failure to do so could lead to the proliferation of illegal firearms and compromise the integrity of the licensing system. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of each application against the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, prioritizing thorough verification of all submitted documents and applicant credentials. This includes cross-referencing information with relevant law enforcement and intelligence agencies to confirm eligibility and identify any potential security risks. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the core principles of the All-Pakistan Arms License Framework, which mandates a rigorous vetting process to prevent the misuse of firearms. Ethical considerations also strongly support this approach, as the primary duty of licensing authorities is to protect public safety. An approach that focuses solely on the speed of processing to meet performance targets, without adequately verifying applicant eligibility or the authenticity of submitted documents, is professionally unacceptable. This failure to adhere to the verification mandates of the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations creates significant security vulnerabilities and is ethically unsound, as it prioritizes administrative efficiency over public safety. Another unacceptable approach is to rely on outdated or incomplete databases for background checks. This practice violates the spirit and letter of the All-Pakistan Arms License regulation, which implicitly require up-to-date and comprehensive checks. It also poses an ethical risk by potentially overlooking critical information that could disqualify an applicant. Finally, an approach that delegates the final approval of licenses to junior staff without adequate oversight or training, even if they are instructed to follow the regulations, is also professionally flawed. This can lead to inconsistencies in application review and an increased likelihood of errors or omissions, undermining the integrity of the entire licensing process and failing to uphold the responsibilities mandated by the All-Pakistan Arms License Framework. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. This involves prioritizing thoroughness and accuracy over speed, implementing robust verification protocols, ensuring continuous training for staff, and establishing clear lines of accountability. Regular audits and reviews of the process are also essential to identify and rectify any potential weaknesses. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates a concern that the process for granting arms licenses in Punjab, Pakistan, may be influenced by subjective interpretations of public interest. Considering the provisions of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, which approach best balances the applicant's right to apply with the state's obligation to ensure public safety. Option A. Base the decision primarily on the applicant's social standing and perceived influence within the community, as this may indicate their ability to responsibly handle a firearm. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive background check of the applicant, verify the stated purpose of the firearm, and assess any documented history of violence or mental instability, making a decision strictly based on these objective findings and the criteria outlined in the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. Option C. Deny the license if the applicant belongs to a profession or region that has historically been associated with a higher incidence of crime, regardless of individual circumstances. Option D. Issue the license promptly to avoid administrative delays, assuming the applicant is of good character, unless there is immediate and obvious evidence to the contrary. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive background check of the applicant, verify the stated purpose of the firearm, and assess any documented history of violence or mental instability, making a decision strictly based on these objective findings and the criteria outlined in the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for subjective interpretation of public interest when assessing an arms license application. Balancing the applicant's right to apply with the state's responsibility to ensure public safety requires careful consideration of established legal principles and the specific provisions of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. The core of the challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate concerns for public safety and arbitrary denial based on unsubstantiated fears or personal biases. The best approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's background and the intended use of the firearm, strictly adhering to the criteria outlined in the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and relevant administrative guidelines. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, assessing their mental and physical fitness, and evaluating the stated purpose for the license against established public safety considerations. The decision must be grounded in evidence and demonstrable risk factors, rather than speculation. This aligns with the ordinance's intent to regulate arms possession for lawful purposes while safeguarding public order and security. An approach that relies on generalized assumptions about individuals from certain regions or professions, without specific evidence of a threat, is ethically and legally flawed. Such an approach risks discrimination and violates the principle of individual assessment mandated by law. Similarly, prioritizing expediency over thoroughness by issuing a license without adequate verification of the applicant's suitability or the legitimacy of their stated purpose would undermine public safety and contravene the regulatory framework. Furthermore, an approach that allows personal opinions or external pressures to influence the decision, overriding the objective criteria set forth in the ordinance, constitutes a failure of professional integrity and adherence to the rule of law. Professionals in this domain should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements and administrative procedures. This involves systematically gathering and verifying all necessary documentation, conducting objective background checks, and applying the established criteria consistently. Any doubts or concerns should be investigated thoroughly, with a focus on factual evidence. The decision-making process should be transparent and defensible, ensuring that it is based on the principles of fairness, impartiality, and the paramount importance of public safety as defined by Pakistani law. Question 8. Regulatory review indicates that an applicant for an all-Pakistan arms license has provided documentation that appears complete but expresses significant impatience and suggests they have connections that can expedite the process. What is the most appropriate professional response in Pakistan? Option A. Advise the applicant on informal methods to accelerate the licensing process, leveraging their stated connections. Option B. Reject the application immediately due to the applicant's impatience, without a detailed review of the provided documentation. Option C. Expedite the review process based on the applicant's perceived urgency and assurances, without conducting full verification. Option D. Conduct a thorough verification of all submitted documents and applicant eligibility against the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, irrespective of the applicant's impatience or claims of influence. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough verification of all submitted documents and applicant eligibility against the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, irrespective of the applicant's impatience or claims of influence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire and the strict legal requirements for obtaining an arms license in Pakistan. The applicant's eagerness and potential misrepresentation of facts necessitate a careful, compliant approach to avoid facilitating illegal activity or jeopardizing the integrity of the licensing process. Professional judgment is paramount to ensure adherence to the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying all submitted documentation against the requirements stipulated by the All-Pakistan Arms License framework. This includes confirming the applicant's eligibility, the authenticity of supporting documents, and ensuring full compliance with all procedural steps outlined in the relevant laws and regulations governing arms licensing in Pakistan. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the legal mandate of the licensing authority, prioritizes public safety by preventing unqualified individuals from obtaining firearms, and maintains the integrity of the licensing system. It aligns with the ethical obligation of professionals involved in such processes to act with due diligence and in accordance with the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's assurances and expediting the process without thorough verification. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses critical due diligence requirements, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an ineligible individual. thereby violating the spirit and letter of the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations and compromising public safety. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the application outright based on the applicant's perceived impatience, without a thorough review of the submitted documentation and a clear understanding of the legal grounds for rejection. This could be seen as unprofessional and potentially discriminatory if not based on objective, legally defined criteria. Finally, advising the applicant on how to circumvent or speed up the process through informal or non-compliant means is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This directly undermines the legal framework and could expose the professional to legal repercussions and disciplinary action. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this domain should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations and all associated procedural guidelines. Second, meticulously review all submitted documentation for completeness and authenticity, cross-referencing with legal requirements. Third, engage with the applicant professionally to clarify any ambiguities or missing information, always within the bounds of the law. Fourth, if any discrepancies or non-compliance issues arise, address them directly and transparently, explaining the specific regulatory requirements that are not being met. Finally, make a decision based solely on adherence to the legal framework and the applicant's demonstrated eligibility, ensuring that public safety and regulatory integrity are always prioritized. Question 9. Performance analysis shows that an applicant for an All Pakistan Arms license has a prior conviction for a minor traffic violation that resulted in a fine. Considering the regulatory framework of Pakistan, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Proceed with the application and issue the license, assuming that a minor traffic violation does not impact eligibility for an arms license. Option B. Immediately deny the application upon discovering any criminal conviction, regardless of its nature or severity. Option C. Rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration regarding their criminal history and overlook the need for independent verification. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record to determine if the specific conviction disqualifies them under the Arms Act, 1959, and assess their overall suitability for an arms license. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record to determine if the specific conviction disqualifies them under the Arms Act, 1959, and assess their overall suitability for an arms license. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms and the strict regulatory environment governing their possession in Pakistan. The applicant's past conviction, even if for a minor offense, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to hold an arms license. Navigating the requirements of the Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules requires meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of eligibility criteria, particularly concerning criminal history. Failure to adhere to these regulations can lead to severe penalties, including license revocation and legal prosecution. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's criminal record against the specific disqualifications outlined in the Arms Act, 1959, and relevant provincial rules. This approach necessitates verifying the nature and severity of the past conviction and determining if it falls under any of the statutory grounds for refusal or revocation of an arms license. If the conviction does not explicitly disqualify the applicant, the next step would be to assess if the applicant meets all other eligibility criteria, such as character and suitability, as mandated by the licensing authority. This thorough due diligence ensures compliance with the law and upholds public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the application solely based on the existence of any criminal conviction, without a detailed examination of the offense's nature and its specific impact on arms license eligibility under Pakistani law. This fails to acknowledge that not all convictions automatically disqualify an individual and bypasses the legal framework that allows for nuanced assessment. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the application without independently verifying the applicant's criminal record, relying only on their self-declaration. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it undermines the integrity of the licensing process and could inadvertently grant a license to an unsuitable individual, jeopardizing public safety. A further incorrect approach is to assume that a conviction for a non-violent offense automatically permits the issuance of an arms license, without considering the licensing authority's discretion and the broader public interest in responsible firearm ownership. The Arms Act, 1959, grants authorities the power to refuse licenses based on broader considerations of suitability and public safety, even if a specific conviction isn't explicitly listed as a disqualifier. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and legally grounded decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the Arms Act, 1959, and any provincial amendments or rules. When evaluating an application, the primary step is to identify any potential disqualifications based on the applicant's history. This requires obtaining and scrutinizing official criminal record documentation. If a conviction exists, the critical step is to determine if that specific conviction is a statutory bar to obtaining an arms license under Pakistani law. If it is not an automatic disqualifier, the professional must then assess the applicant's overall character and suitability, considering any mitigating or aggravating factors, and adhere to the licensing authority's guidelines and discretionary powers. Transparency and thorough documentation of the decision-making process are paramount. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that the average time to process an arms license application in Punjab, Pakistan, has increased by 15% over the last fiscal year. To address this, the licensing authority is considering implementing new software. If the current average cost per application is PKR 850, and the projected cost of the new software, amortized over 5 years, is PKR 5,000,000, and it is estimated that the software will reduce the processing time by 20% and consequently reduce the average cost per application by 10% due to increased efficiency. What is the net financial impact on the authority over the 5-year period, assuming 100,000 applications are processed annually? Option A. A net saving of PKR 3,400,000 over 5 years. Option B. A net cost increase of PKR 1,600,000 over 5 years. Option C. A net saving of PKR 1,000,000 over 5 years. Option D. A net cost increase of PKR 5,000,000 over 5 years. Correct answer is A. A net saving of PKR 3,400,000 over 5 years. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical need to assess the financial implications of processing arms license applications in Pakistan. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing administrative efficiency with the stringent legal and security requirements mandated by the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and associated rules. Miscalculations or misinterpretations of processing costs can lead to underfunding of essential security checks or overspending, impacting public resources. Careful judgment is required to ensure that cost-saving measures do not compromise the integrity of the licensing process, which is paramount for national security. The best approach involves a detailed cost-benefit analysis that accurately quantifies all direct and indirect expenses associated with processing an arms license application, while also considering the potential benefits of a streamlined, secure process. This includes factoring in personnel time for verification, background checks, administrative overhead, and the cost of maintaining secure records, all in accordance with the procedures outlined in the Arms Rules, 2001. The calculation should aim to determine the average cost per application, allowing for informed budgeting and resource allocation. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the efficiency study's findings by providing a data-driven understanding of operational costs, enabling informed decision-making that aligns with regulatory compliance and public interest. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on reducing the number of personnel involved in the verification process without a corresponding assessment of the impact on the thoroughness of background checks. This fails to consider the regulatory requirement for due diligence as stipulated in the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, potentially compromising security and leading to the issuance of licenses to ineligible individuals. Another incorrect approach is to estimate costs based on anecdotal evidence or outdated figures, neglecting the current operational expenses and inflation. This would lead to inaccurate budgeting and could result in insufficient funds for essential security protocols, violating the spirit of responsible governance and the need for robust arms control. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of processing over accuracy and completeness of documentation, without a clear cost-benefit justification tied to specific efficiency gains that do not compromise security, would be professionally unsound. This disregards the legal framework that mandates thorough vetting. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory objectives. This involves identifying all cost drivers, quantifying them using reliable data, and then evaluating the impact of any proposed efficiency measures against these costs and the overarching legal and security mandates. A cost-benefit framework, grounded in the specific requirements of Pakistani arms licensing law, should guide all financial and operational decisions. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that when assessing an application for an all-Pakistan arms license, what is the most critical factor to consider to ensure compliance with the Arms Act, 1961 and provincial regulations, while mitigating potential risks to public safety? Option A. A cursory review of the applicant's stated intent for acquiring the firearm, assuming good faith without further investigation. Option B. The applicant's financial capacity to purchase and maintain a firearm, without a detailed assessment of their suitability or the legitimacy of their need. Option C. A thorough background check of the applicant, verification of their stated purpose for the license, and confirmation of their eligibility against all statutory requirements. Option D. The applicant's personal reputation and any informal endorsements from influential individuals within the community. The correct answer is C. A thorough background check of the applicant, verification of their stated purpose for the license, and confirmation of their eligibility against all statutory requirements. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing the impact of a proposed arms license application in Pakistan requires a nuanced understanding of the Arms Act, 1961, and associated provincial rules, which are designed to balance individual rights with public safety. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves navigating potentially conflicting interests: the applicant's desire for a firearm versus the state's responsibility to prevent misuse and maintain law and order. A thorough impact assessment must go beyond mere documentation and delve into the applicant's background, the stated purpose of the license, and the potential risks associated with granting it, all within the strict legal framework of Pakistan. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive risk-based assessment that meticulously verifies the applicant's eligibility criteria as stipulated by the Arms Act, 1961, and relevant provincial regulations. This includes a thorough background check to ascertain any history of criminal activity, mental instability, or previous misuse of firearms, and a detailed evaluation of the stated purpose for the license to ensure it aligns with legitimate needs and does not pose a threat to public safety. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the spirit and letter of Pakistani arms control legislation, which prioritizes public security and responsible firearm ownership. It ensures that the decision-making process is grounded in objective evidence and legal compliance, minimizing the risk of erroneous approvals. An approach that focuses solely on the applicant's stated intent, without independent verification of their background or the legitimacy of their purpose, is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct due diligence constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it bypasses crucial safeguards designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. Such an oversight could lead to the proliferation of illegal arms or the arming of individuals who pose a risk to themselves or others, directly contravening the objectives of the Arms Act, 1961. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the license based on informal recommendations or social standing without adhering to the prescribed legal procedures. This undermines the integrity of the licensing system, introduces bias, and creates a loophole for individuals who may not meet the statutory requirements. It is ethically unsound as it prioritizes personal connections over public safety and legal mandates. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or incomplete documentation without seeking updated information or conducting further inquiries is also flawed. The Arms Act, 1961, and its implementing rules necessitate a current and accurate assessment. Relying on stale information can lead to decisions based on a false premise, potentially endangering public safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations in Pakistan should involve a systematic review of the application against all statutory requirements, followed by rigorous verification of all submitted information. This includes cross-referencing with law enforcement records, conducting interviews where necessary, and documenting every step of the assessment process. The ultimate decision must be justifiable under the Arms Act, 1961, and reflect a commitment to public safety and responsible governance. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a high impact if an applicant with a history of minor public order offenses is granted an arms license in Pakistan. Considering the provisions of the Arms Act, 1959, and its associated rules, which of the following represents the most prudent and professionally responsible course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the arms license without further investigation, assuming that minor public order offenses do not inherently disqualify an applicant if they do not have a conviction for a serious crime. Option B. Postpone the decision indefinitely, pending a review that lacks a defined timeline or clear criteria for resolution. Option C. Conduct a detailed inquiry into the nature and recency of the offenses, the applicant's current character, employment, and reasons for seeking the license, potentially consulting with local law enforcement before making a decision. Option D. Immediately deny the application based on the presence of any past public order offenses, regardless of their severity or the applicant's subsequent conduct. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed inquiry into the nature and recency of the offenses, the applicant's current character, employment, and reasons for seeking the license, potentially consulting with local law enforcement before making a decision. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a high impact if an applicant with a history of minor public order offenses is granted an arms license in Pakistan. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to possess a firearm for legitimate purposes against the public safety imperative. The Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules in Pakistan emphasize the need for responsible firearm ownership and place the onus on licensing authorities to assess the suitability of applicants. A superficial review could lead to a dangerous oversight, while an overly restrictive approach could unfairly deny a lawful right. The best professional approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's circumstances, considering the nature and recency of the public order offenses, their rehabilitation, and any mitigating factors. This aligns with the spirit of the Arms Act, which aims to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who pose a risk to public safety or themselves. A detailed inquiry into the applicant's current character, employment stability, and reasons for seeking a license, coupled with consultation with local law enforcement, is crucial. This comprehensive due diligence ensures that the licensing decision is informed, objective, and defensible, prioritizing public safety without undue prejudice. An approach that dismisses the application solely based on the existence of past offenses, without considering their context or the applicant's subsequent conduct, fails to uphold principles of fairness and proportionality. It overlooks the possibility of rehabilitation and can lead to arbitrary decision-making, which is contrary to the principles of good governance and due process. Another incorrect approach involves granting the license without any further investigation, relying solely on the absence of a criminal conviction for serious offenses. This ignores the moderate likelihood of high impact indicated by the risk matrix and the licensing authority's duty to proactively assess potential risks, even for minor offenses that might indicate a propensity for irresponsible behavior. This approach prioritizes expediency over public safety. Finally, an approach that involves delaying the decision indefinitely without a clear process for further review or communication with the applicant is also professionally unacceptable. It creates uncertainty for the applicant and fails to fulfill the licensing authority's responsibility to process applications in a timely and transparent manner. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that includes 1. Understanding the regulatory framework and its objectives. 2. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment based on available information. 3. Performing thorough due diligence, including background checks and interviews. 4. Considering all relevant factors, including mitigating circumstances and evidence of rehabilitation. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind it. 6. Communicating the decision clearly to the applicant. Question 13. Process analysis reveals a scenario where an individual in Pakistan applies for an arms license, citing a need for personal protection due to perceived threats in their locality. The licensing authority has received informal, unverified information suggesting the applicant has a history of aggressive behavior, though no formal charges have ever been filed. Considering the All-Pakistan Arms License Framework, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the arms license immediately based on the applicant's stated need for personal protection, assuming the informal information is unsubstantiated, and prioritizing the applicant's perceived right to self-defense. Option B. Deny the arms license based on the unverified information about aggressive behavior without further investigation. To err on the side of caution regarding public safety. Option C. Conduct a thorough background investigation, including verification of any alleged past incidents and a detailed assessment of the applicant's stated need for protection against documented threats, while ensuring all statutory eligibility criteria are met before making a decision. Option D. Expedite the processing of the application by waiving standard documentation requirements, given the applicant's claim of imminent threat, to ensure timely access to a firearm for self-defense. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough background investigation, including verification of any alleged past incidents and a detailed assessment of the applicant's stated need for protection against documented threats, while ensuring all statutory eligibility criteria are met before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent sensitivity surrounding firearms and the legal framework governing their possession in Pakistan. The applicant's circumstances, particularly the potential for misuse or diversion of a firearm, necessitate a rigorous and ethical assessment that prioritizes public safety and adherence to the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations. Misjudgment could lead to severe legal repercussions for the applicant and the licensing authority, as well as potential harm to the public. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive and documented assessment of the applicant's suitability, focusing on the specific requirements and spirit of the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations. This approach entails a thorough review of the applicant's background, including any criminal history, mental health evaluations where relevant and permissible by law, and a clear, justifiable reason for requiring a firearm that aligns with lawful purposes such as self-defense or sport shooting, as defined by Pakistani law. The licensing authority must ensure that the applicant meets all statutory eligibility criteria and poses no undue risk to public safety. This aligns with the regulatory intent to control firearm ownership and prevent their acquisition by individuals who may misuse them. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the license based solely on the applicant's stated intent without independent verification or a thorough background check. This fails to uphold the due diligence required by the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations, which implicitly demand a proactive assessment of risk rather than passive acceptance of an applicant's claims. It bypasses the critical safeguards designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. Another unacceptable approach is to deny the license based on unsubstantiated rumors or personal biases of the licensing officer, without any factual basis or reference to the applicant's eligibility under the law. This is ethically unsound and violates principles of fairness and due process, as licensing decisions must be grounded in objective criteria and legal provisions, not conjecture. A further incorrect approach is to expedite the process by overlooking standard documentation or verification procedures due to perceived urgency or external pressure. This undermines the integrity of the licensing system and creates loopholes that could be exploited, directly contravening the regulatory framework's emphasis on meticulous record-keeping and thorough vetting. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legislation, in this case, the All-Pakistan Arms License regulations. This involves identifying all statutory requirements for applicants and the licensing authority's responsibilities. The next step is to gather all necessary documentation and conduct thorough, objective investigations. Decisions should be made based on evidence and in strict adherence to legal provisions, ensuring that public safety and regulatory compliance are paramount. Any deviation from these principles, driven by expediency or personal judgment without legal backing, constitutes a professional failure. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape when assisting an individual in Pakistan with an application for an all-Pakistan arms license, particularly concerning past legal entanglements. Which of the following approaches best ensures a successful and compliant application process? Option A. Relying on personal acquaintances within the licensing authority to expedite the approval process without full disclosure. Option B. Omitting any mention of past legal issues to present a cleaner record, assuming they are minor and unlikely to be discovered. Option C. Submitting falsified documents to obscure or negate the impact of any past legal proceedings. Option D. Fully disclosing all past legal issues with supporting documentation and adhering strictly to all application requirements as per the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. The correct answer is D. Fully disclosing all past legal issues with supporting documentation and adhering strictly to all application requirements as per the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves navigating the complex and sensitive process of obtaining an arms license in Pakistan, which is heavily regulated to ensure public safety and national security. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information can lead to severe legal consequences, including the denial of the license, penalties, and potential criminal charges. The applicant's personal circumstances and the intended use of the firearm require careful consideration against the strict legal framework governing arms possession. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and honest disclosure of all required information, including any past legal issues, and providing verifiable documentation to support the application. This approach aligns with the principles of transparency and integrity mandated by the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and associated rules. Specifically, Section 6 of the Ordinance outlines the grounds for refusal of a license, which includes individuals with a history of certain convictions or those deemed a risk to public safety. By proactively addressing any potential concerns with truthful information and supporting evidence, the applicant demonstrates compliance and trustworthiness, which are paramount for license approval. Incorrect approaches analysis. Submitting an incomplete application without disclosing past legal issues is a direct violation of the application requirements and the spirit of the law. This omission can be construed as an attempt to mislead the licensing authority, leading to immediate rejection and potential blacklisting. It fails to meet the ethical obligation of full disclosure. Providing fabricated or misleading documentation to conceal past legal issues is a fraudulent act. This not only guarantees the denial of the arms license, but also carries severe legal penalties under Pakistani law, including imprisonment and substantial fines. It fundamentally undermines the integrity of the licensing process, seeking to influence the decision through informal channels or personal connections, rather than relying on the merits of the application and adherence to legal procedures, bypasses the established regulatory framework. This approach is unethical and potentially illegal, as it suggests an attempt to circumvent due process and could be seen as bribery or corruption, further jeopardizing the application and the professional standing of anyone involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with arms license applications in Pakistan must adopt a systematic approach. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the Pakistan Arms Ordinance, 1965, and relevant provincial rules. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of the applicant's background to identify any potential disqualifying factors. 3. Ensuring all documentation is accurate, complete, and verifiable. 4. Communicating transparently with the applicant about the process and potential challenges. 5. Submitting the application with full integrity, allowing the authorities to make a decision based on the presented facts and legal criteria. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that relaxing certain arms licensing requirements in Pakistan could stimulate the local economy through increased sales of firearms and related accessories. Considering the provisions of the Arms Act, 1959, and the paramount importance of public safety, what is the most professionally responsible approach to evaluating this proposal? Option A. Focus the analysis solely on the economic gains, proposing that any negative externalities can be addressed through future, separate policy interventions. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that rigorously evaluates potential risks to public safety, the capacity of law enforcement, and the alignment with the Arms Act, 1959, alongside economic benefits. Option C. Prioritize the economic benefits and suggest a phased relaxation of licensing, relying on public trust and self-regulation for responsible firearm ownership. Option D. Recommend immediate relaxation of licensing requirements to capitalize on the identified economic opportunities, assuming that increased legal ownership will deter illegal arms acquisition. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that rigorously evaluates potential risks to public safety, the capacity of law enforcement, and the alignment with the Arms Act, 1959, alongside economic benefits. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the stated benefits of a policy change with its potential negative impacts on individuals and society, all within the specific legal framework of Pakistan concerning arms licensing. The Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules govern the issuance, possession, and regulation of firearms, emphasizing public safety and national security. A cost-benefit analysis, while a valuable tool, must be conducted with a nuanced understanding of these legal obligations and ethical considerations. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes public safety and adherence to the Arms Act, 1959, by thoroughly evaluating the potential risks and benefits of relaxing licensing requirements. This includes considering the likelihood and severity of misuse, the capacity of law enforcement to manage increased numbers of licensed firearms, and the potential impact on crime rates. Furthermore, it necessitates consulting with relevant security agencies and legal experts to ensure any proposed changes align with the spirit and letter of Pakistani law, which places a strong emphasis on responsible firearm ownership and the prevention of illicit arms proliferation. This approach ensures that policy decisions are grounded in a robust understanding of legal mandates and potential societal consequences, safeguarding public order. An approach that focuses solely on the economic benefits of increased arms sales without adequately weighing the public safety implications is professionally unacceptable. It fails to acknowledge the primary purpose of arms licensing regulations, which is to control the availability of firearms and mitigate risks to public security as mandated by the Arms Act, 1959. Such a narrow focus could lead to policy recommendations that inadvertently increase the likelihood of firearms falling into the wrong hands, thereby contravening the law's intent. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to recommend relaxing licensing requirements based on anecdotal evidence or public demand, without rigorous data collection and analysis. The Arms Act, 1959, requires a structured and evidence-based process for licensing, and bypassing this due diligence undermines the integrity of the regulatory framework. Relying on informal opinions rather than systematic impact assessment risks overlooking critical security vulnerabilities. Finally, an approach that proposes to relax licensing requirements without a corresponding enhancement of enforcement mechanisms and oversight capabilities is also flawed. The effectiveness of any licensing regime, whether strict or relaxed, depends on the state's ability to monitor and enforce compliance. Ignoring this crucial aspect, as stipulated by the broader public safety objectives inherent in the Arms Act, 1959, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing legislation, the Arms Act, 1959, and its rules. This framework should then involve identifying all potential stakeholders and their interests, systematically gathering data on both the positive and negative impacts of proposed changes, and critically evaluating these impacts against legal requirements and ethical principles. A consultative process with relevant government bodies, security experts, and legal counsel is essential to ensure that any recommendations are legally sound, ethically responsible, and practically implementable within the Pakistani context. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that an applicant for an all-Pakistan arms license has a prior conviction for a non-violent offense. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority in Pakistan? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record against the specific disqualification criteria outlined in the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations and relevant sections of the Arms Act, 1960. To determine eligibility. Option B. Grant the license without further scrutiny, assuming that a non-violent offense does not pose a risk for firearm possession. Option C. Immediately deny the application based on the existence of any criminal conviction, regardless of its nature. Option D. Seek informal advice from experienced colleagues on whether to proceed with the application, bypassing formal regulatory checks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record against the specific disqualification criteria outlined in the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations and relevant sections of the Arms Act, 1960, to determine eligibility. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent sensitivity surrounding firearms and the legal framework governing their possession in Pakistan. The applicant's past conviction, even if for a non-violent offense, raises significant questions about their suitability to hold an arms license under the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply with the state's responsibility to ensure public safety and uphold the law. A superficial review could lead to an incorrect decision, potentially jeopardizing public safety or unfairly denying a legitimate application. Careful judgment, grounded in a thorough understanding of the relevant legislation, is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's criminal record in conjunction with the specific provisions of the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations concerning eligibility criteria and disqualifications. This approach necessitates understanding how past convictions, regardless of their nature, are treated under the law for the purpose of arms licensing. It requires consulting the relevant sections of the Arms Act, 1960, and any associated rules or notifications that detail the impact of criminal convictions on an applicant's eligibility. This meticulous examination ensures that the decision is not only legally compliant, but also ethically sound, prioritizing public safety while adhering to due process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the application solely based on the existence of any criminal conviction, without further investigation into the nature of the offense and its specific implications under Pakistani arms licensing law. This fails to acknowledge that not all convictions may automatically disqualify an applicant and bypasses the legal requirement for a nuanced assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license without any due diligence regarding the conviction, assuming that since it was not a violent crime, it poses no risk. This disregards the legislative intent behind background checks for firearms, which aim to assess overall suitability and adherence to the law, irrespective of the specific offense category. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on informal advice or personal judgment without consulting the official regulatory framework. This introduces subjectivity and risks noncompliance with the strict legal requirements for issuing arms licenses in Pakistan, potentially leading to legal challenges and compromising the integrity of the licensing process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this domain must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the All Pakistan Arms License Regulations, including all amendments and interpretations. When faced with an application involving a criminal record, the process should involve 1. Identifying the specific legal provisions related to disqualifications due to criminal convictions. 2. Investigating the details of the conviction, including the nature of the offense and the sentence imposed. 3. Cross-referencing this information with the legal requirements to determine eligibility. 4. Documenting the entire review process and the rationale for the final decision. This structured approach ensures fairness, legality, and public safety. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates that Mr. Ahmed's arms license in Punjab, Pakistan, is due for renewal in 3 months. What is the most appropriate course of action for the professional managing this license to ensure continued legal possession of the firearm? Option A. Suggest Mr. Ahmed inquire with local police officials about informal renewal procedures to expedite the process. Option B. Immediately begin the formal renewal process by submitting the required application and documentation to the relevant licensing authority in Punjab. Option C. Advise Mr. Ahmed that the license will likely renew automatically and to wait until closer to the expiry date to confirm. Option D. Inform Mr. Ahmed that no action is needed until the license has actually expired, at which point a new application can be considered. Correct answer is B. Immediately begin the formal renewal process by submitting the required application and documentation to the relevant licensing authority in Punjab. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent sensitivity of firearms and the legal framework governing their possession in Pakistan. The Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules are stringent, requiring meticulous adherence to procedures for licensing, renewal, and any changes. Misinterpreting or neglecting the renewal process can lead to severe legal consequences, including confiscation of the firearm and potential criminal charges. The professional's duty is to ensure compliance with the law while safeguarding the client's rights and property. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying the expiry date of the arms license and initiating the renewal process well in advance of its expiration. This approach ensures continuous legal possession of the firearm and avoids any lapse in compliance with the Arms Act, 1959. By submitting the renewal application and required documentation to the relevant licensing authority in Pakistan before the expiry date, the professional demonstrates diligence and upholds the legal requirements for arms possession. This proactive stance minimizes risk and ensures the client remains in lawful possession of their firearm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume the license automatically renews or to wait until after the expiry date to initiate the renewal process. This failure to act before the expiry date directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the Arms Act, 1959, which mandates timely renewal. Such inaction can result in the license lapsing, rendering the possession of the firearm illegal, and exposing the client to penalties. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal assurances from individuals not authorized by the licensing authority regarding the renewal process. The Arms Act, 1959, outlines specific procedures and documentation for license renewal. Deviating from these established channels and relying on hearsay or unofficial advice bypasses the legal framework and creates a significant risk of non-compliance. This can lead to the application being rejected or the license being deemed invalid. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the expiry date altogether and continue possessing the firearm as if the license were still valid. This is a direct violation of the Arms Act, 1959, and carries the most severe consequences. The law requires a valid, unexpired license for legal firearm possession. Continuing possession without a valid license is an offense. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with arms licenses in Pakistan must adopt a systematic and compliant approach. This involves understanding the specific provisions of the Arms Act, 1959, and its rules, maintaining a clear record of license expiry dates, and prioritizing proactive engagement with the licensing authorities. A robust internal system for tracking deadlines and a commitment to following official procedures are essential for mitigating risks and ensuring client protection. When in doubt, seeking clarification directly from the licensing authority is always the most prudent course of action. Question 18. The audit findings indicate a pattern of arms license renewals being processed with minimal re-verification of applicant eligibility in Punjab, Pakistan. A senior official is considering streamlining the process by relying on the applicant's history of responsible license holding. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with the Arms Act, 1959, and the Arms Rules, 2001? Option A. Expedite the renewal process for applicants with a long history of holding a valid arms license, assuming their circumstances remain unchanged. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all submitted renewal applications, verifying current eligibility criteria, background checks, and required documentation as stipulated by the Arms Act, 1959, and the Arms Rules, 2001 for Punjab. Option C. Delegate the final approval of renewals to junior staff who can process them more quickly, provided they have a general understanding of the licensing process. Option D. Approve renewals based on the applicant's verbal confirmation that they continue to meet all licensing requirements. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all submitted renewal applications, verifying current eligibility criteria, background checks, and required documentation as stipulated by the Arms Act, 1959, and the Arms Rules, 2001 for Punjab. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the rigorous application of the Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules in Pakistan concerning the issuance and renewal of arms licenses. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing administrative efficiency with strict adherence to national security and public safety regulations. Misinterpreting or overlooking procedural requirements can have severe consequences, including the proliferation of unauthorized firearms and potential misuse, undermining the very purpose of the licensing framework. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of all submitted documentation against the explicit requirements of the Arms Act, 1959, and the Arms Rules, 2001, for the specific province. This includes verifying the applicant's eligibility, the necessity for the firearm, the applicant's character and background checks, and ensuring all fees and documentation are in order as stipulated by the relevant district magistrate or licensing authority. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the legislative intent of the Arms Act, which is to control the possession of arms and ammunition for the security of the public and the state. Adherence to these established procedures ensures that only qualified and vetted individuals are granted licenses, thereby mitigating risks associated with firearms. An incorrect approach would be to expedite the renewal process based solely on the applicant's long-standing possession of a license, without re-verifying current eligibility criteria. This fails to acknowledge that the Arms Act and rules are dynamic and require periodic reassessment of an individual's suitability to possess a firearm. Ethically and regulatorily, this bypasses the due diligence mandated by law, potentially overlooking changes in the applicant's circumstances that might render them a risk. Another incorrect approach is to approve the renewal based on a verbal assurance from the applicant that all conditions continue to be met, without demanding supporting documentation. This deviates from the established procedural safeguards and relies on hearsay rather than verifiable evidence, which is contrary to the principles of good governance and the explicit requirements for license renewal under Pakistani law. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the final approval of the renewal to a subordinate official without adequate oversight or a clear mandate, especially if the subordinate lacks the full authority or understanding of the licensing requirements. This can lead to inconsistent application of the law and a breakdown in accountability, jeopardizing the integrity of the arms licensing system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a meticulous, evidence-based review of all applications against the current legal framework. This involves understanding the specific provisions of the Arms Act, 1959, and the Arms Rules, 2001, for the relevant province, maintaining a comprehensive checklist of requirements, and ensuring that all documentation is current and verifiable. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or senior authorities within the licensing body is paramount to ensure compliance and uphold public safety. Question 19. Implementation of the Arms Act, 1959, in Pakistan requires licensing authorities to meticulously assess firearm license applications. Considering an applicant who has provided a general statement of personal protection as their reason for seeking a firearm, and has a documented history of minor altercations, which of the following approaches best upholds the legal and ethical obligations of the licensing authority? Option A. Reject the application outright due to the applicant's past minor altercations, without a detailed assessment of their nature. Option B. Approve the license based on the applicant's stated desire for self-defense, assuming a genuine need without further investigation. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated purpose, verify supporting documentation, and perform a thorough background check including character assessment and past legal entanglements. Option D. Approve the license with minimal documentation and a brief interview, accepting the applicant's statements at face value. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated purpose, verify supporting documentation, and perform a thorough background check including character assessment and past legal entanglements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misuse of firearms and the critical need to adhere strictly to the Arms Act, 1959, and associated rules in Pakistan. The applicant's vague justification for needing a firearm, coupled with a history of minor altercations, necessitates a thorough and objective assessment to prevent the issuance of a license to an individual who might pose a risk. The onus is on the licensing authority to balance the applicant's rights with public safety, requiring a nuanced understanding of the legal framework and ethical considerations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated purpose for the firearm, cross-referencing it with supporting documentation, and conducting a thorough background check that includes verification of the applicant's character and any past legal entanglements. This approach directly aligns with the spirit and letter of the Arms Act, 1959, which mandates that licenses are granted only to individuals deemed fit and proper, with a genuine need for a firearm, and no history that would suggest a propensity for violence or misuse. The law requires careful consideration of the applicant's suitability, and this thorough due diligence ensures that the licensing authority fulfills its statutory obligation to protect public safety while fairly assessing the applicant's request. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves approving the license based solely on the applicant's stated desire for self-defense without further investigation. This fails to meet the legal requirement for a demonstrated genuine need beyond a general fear, and ignores the potential for the firearm to be used inappropriately, violating the public safety mandate of the Arms Act. Another incorrect approach is to summarily reject the application based on the applicant's past minor altercations, without a proper assessment of the nature and severity of those incidents, and whether they indicate a pattern of behavior that would disqualify the applicant. This could be seen as an arbitrary denial, failing to provide the applicant with a fair hearing as implied by the administrative processes surrounding license applications. A further incorrect approach is to approve the license with minimal documentation, relying on a cursory interview and accepting the applicant's word without independent verification. This bypasses essential due diligence, potentially overlooking critical red flags and contravening the principle of responsible firearm licensing, which requires robust evidence of suitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the Arms Act, 1959, and its implementing rules. They must then meticulously gather all required documentation from the applicant, conduct independent background checks, and critically evaluate the applicant's stated purpose. Any discrepancies or concerning information should trigger further investigation. The decision must be based on objective evidence and a balanced consideration of the applicant's needs against the paramount importance of public safety, ensuring that every license issued is justified and compliant with Pakistani law. Question 20. To address the challenge of accurately determining the financial obligation for renewing an arms license in Punjab, Pakistan, under the Arms Act, 1960, a client presents a license that expired 3 years ago. The last renewal fee paid was PKR 500. Official provincial guidelines indicate a base fee of PKR 500 for this license category and stipulate an annual inflation adjustment factor of 5% applied to the base fee for each year the license has been expired. What is the correct renewal fee inclusive of the inflation adjustment? Option A, PKR 578, 81. Option B, PKR 650, 00. Option C, PKR 600, 00. Option D, PKR 500, 00. The correct answer is A, PKR 578, 81. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the financial implications of an arms license renewal in Pakistan, specifically concerning the Arms Act, 1960, and associated provincial rules. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying the prescribed fee structure, which may involve tiered rates, inflation adjustments, or specific administrative charges, and ensuring compliance with the financial regulations governing arms licensing. Miscalculation can lead to underpayment, resulting in penalties or license invalidation, or overpayment, causing financial loss to the applicant and potential administrative complications. The best professional approach involves a meticulous calculation of the renewal fee based on the official fee schedule provided by the relevant provincial authority under the Arms Act, 1960. This approach necessitates identifying the correct license category, determining the base fee, and applying any stipulated annual inflation adjustments or administrative charges as per the latest official notifications. For instance, if the Arms Act, 1960, and its subsequent amendments or provincial rules specify a base fee of PKR 500 for a particular license type, and a government-mandated inflation adjustment factor of 5% per annum. The calculation would be renewal fee equals base fee asterisk 1 plus inflation rate, number of years since last renewal if the base fee is PKR 500, and the license expired 3 years ago with a 5% annual inflation adjustment. The calculation would be renewal fee equals 500 asterisk 1 plus 0. 05, 3 renewal fee equals 500 asterisk 1. 05, 3 renewal fee equals 500 asterisk 1. 157,625 renewal fee equals PKR 578. 81, rounded to 2 decimal places. This method ensures accuracy, adherence to the legal framework, and financial prudence, thereby upholding professional integrity and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to simply apply the base fee without considering any inflation adjustments or administrative charges. This fails to comply with the spirit and letter of the Arms Act, 1960, which implicitly or explicitly requires fees to reflect current economic conditions and administrative costs. Such an approach risks underpayment and subsequent penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the renewal fee based on past experience or anecdotal information from other license holders. This is professionally unsound as it bypasses the official fee structure and can lead to significant inaccuracies. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence and disregard for the specific regulatory requirements. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a general percentage increase without reference to an official government-published inflation index or adjustment factor. While inflation is a factor, the specific mechanism for its application to arms license fees is dictated by law and administrative rules, not by general economic assumptions. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific legal and regulatory framework, Arms Act, 1960, and relevant provincial rules. 2. Locating the official, up-to-date fee schedule and any associated adjustment mechanisms. 3. Performing precise calculations based on the identified parameters. 4. Verifying the calculated amount against any stated maximum fees or administrative guidelines. 5. Documenting the calculation process for transparency and auditability.